Hello?
Do it! Just do it! What are you waiting for?
Look, I'm sorry the video's taking forever to do, but I promise you it will be up by tomorrow, okay? Okay? Now stop calling me, please.
Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Do it! Do it! Don't let your dreams be dreams. Yesterday, you said tomorrow, so just do it! Make the dream come true! Just do it! Do it! Yes, you can! Stop doing it! No, what are you waiting for?
Greetings moviegoers and welcome to another summer movie recap. For those new to my channel, this is the segment where I get to look back on all the movies I got to see during the summer, right before capping it all off with my personal picks for the best and worst films of the season. But for this year, I decided to expand the best and worst categories to 5 choices, just to give you all a better sense of what I thought about this summer's hits and misses. With that said, let's take a look at all 40 and a half movies I got a chance to see over the past few months. How did I get to such a number, you might ask? Well, normally I wouldn't do this, but for this year's countdown, I've decided to include the Kickstarter short film that practically exploded all over YouTube this summer, Kung Fury, just for being one of the most ridiculously awesome things I've ever come across. If you happen to love clever send-ups of 1980s action movies with time travel, Nazis, and dinosaurs thrown in for good measure, then you owe it to yourself to seek out this surefire cult classic.
Thank you.
Now let's move on to the full-length feature movies I got to see, starting in alphabetical order with American Ultra, which reunited the stars of Adventureland, Jesse Eisenberg and Kristen Stewart, who play a stoner couple on the run from the CIA after one of them is discovered to be a secret government-trained assassin. While I did enjoy some of the action scenes and romantic chemistry between Eisenberg and Stewart, I felt that the overall product took itself way too seriously and had trouble balancing its humorous elements with its dark and dramatic ones. Not a terrible film, but it certainly could have been a whole lot more. And speaking of movies that could have been a whole lot more, the last 2 films in Marvel Studios' second phase, Ant-Man and Avengers Age of Ultron, didn't quite meet the standards set by last year's superhero outings, which some have already begun to suspect as a new low for Marvel Studios, which is saying a lot considering both movies made a decent amount of money and received certified fresh ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. Even with the flaws and minor setbacks of both films in mind, they still brought enough of the witty bantering and creative action set pieces that we continue to love, and serve as the perfect appetizers for whatever lies in store for Phase 3. Next we have Cop Car, an independent thriller starring Kevin Bacon as a shady lawman on the hunt for his patrol vehicle after 2 adolescent runaways take it out for an innocent joyride. Even with a premise as simple as this, the movie still managed to pack in the right amount of thrills and darkly comedic timing that would make even the Coen brothers extremely proud. Hitman Agent 47 is another clinker you could add to the long list of generically bad video game adaptations that we sadly keep getting almost every single year. Chances are, this all could have been avoided entirely had the studio decided to give a shit and hire a completely different and more qualified screenwriter instead of rehiring the same one who penned the original Hitman. The Insidious franchise I've always had a soft spot for, and I pass on the same sentiment towards the 3rd chapter in the series. It's definitely not the scariest movie I've seen this year, or anything close to redefining the horror genre, but it does offer plenty of creepy atmosphere, effective scares, and a mythology that's intriguing enough to make me wonder what'll happen next in this ongoing story. As I pointed out in my initial review, Jurassic World was a movie that I still enjoyed overall, despite its numerous amount of flaws, and the fact that it undeservedly destroyed all competition at the box office. So why did it strike a chord with so many moviegoers? Was it purely based on nostalgia, or was it all due to the increasing popularity of Chris Pratt?
Star-Lord, man.
Well, whatever the reason, I think it's safe to say that Jurassic World's days basking in the sun as the year's highest grossing movie are definitely numbered. Of all the movies I regretfully missed out on during my annual trips to South by Southwest, the Brian Wilson biopic Love and Mercy would probably rank somewhere near the very top of the list. Mostly because 1, it's one of 2 very strong musical biopics I've seen this year, and 2, the real Brian Wilson, from what I've heard, actually showed up on stage for one of the few standing ovations that this year's fest received, and if I had been there that day, that would have made the experience of watching this man's tragic yet uplifting life story unfold on screen come full circle. If someone told you that Arnold Schwarzenegger was going to face off against the zombie apocalypse in his next movie, you'd probably expect to see a reversed version of every single action movie he's ever played in, where everyone he brutally kills comes back to life. But that's not what we get with Maggie, which features the former governor playing it completely straight as a desperate father, willing to pay the ultimate price of protecting his infected daughter, played by Abigail Breslin, in what is otherwise a pretty decent post-apocalyptic drama. Although it might come across as a little too somber and depressing for most viewers, I'd still think it's worth checking out for those curious enough to see a different side of Schwarzenegger that we rarely see. The Kings of Tampa returned for a saucy encore in Magic Mike XXL, which proved to be a far more entertaining film than the original by giving in to the extreme demand of millions of horny middle-aged women to include even more gyrating man flesh, along with an even heavier dosage of humor. Guy Ritchie's rendition of the classic spy series, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., had all the makings of what could have been a fun throwback to Cold War spy thrillers, from the snazzy wardrobe to the gorgeous scenery, but sadly couldn't make the right impression due to its lack of comedic energy between any of the main leads, as well as its unnecessary need to overcomplicate a fairly simple plot. I know this movie has plenty of fans, and if you happen to be one of them, that's perfectly fine. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And just to speed things up a little, the teenage dramedy Me and Earl and the Dying Girl was one I thoroughly enjoyed from start to finish, while the Despicable Me spin-off Minions almost made me regret giving positive feedback towards its previous installments. What? Sir Ian McKellen made for an excellent Sherlock and the family-friendly Mr. Holmes, while No Escape offered plenty of palm-sweating, edge-of-your-seat thrills, even amongst its racially insensitive shortcomings, which leaves us with Paper Towns, the follow-up film to last year's young adult adaptation of John Green's The Fault in Our Stars that unfortunately played out more like a creepy teenage stalker flick than a genuine heart-throbbing romance. But at least it was a step above the other disappointing movie geared towards the younger female demographic, which was Pitch Perfect 2, the continuation of one of the most surprising movies of 2012 that sadly stripped away all the charm and likability that made the original so special to begin with. If the filmmakers had any dignity left in them, they would call it quits before this series spirals even further into mediocrity. If only the same advice were given to the filmmakers behind this year's Poltergeist when they decided to turn arguably one of the scariest movies of the 1980s into yet another unfrightening horror remake that relies way too heavily on CGI and run-of-the-mill jump scares. But much like the previous scary movie reboots we've gotten in the past, you're more than likely not going to remember this one by the end of the year. Yep, already forgot. Also fairly forgettable is Ricky and the Flash, starring the only person with more Oscar nominations and statuettes under her belt than God himself, Meryl Streep, who here plays a deadbeat rock artist who visits the family she abandoned years prior. The movie was also written by another Oscar winner, Diablo Cody, and with an award-winning pairing like that, you'd think they'd come up with something just as quirky as Juno or as hard-edged as Young Adult, instead of something that would be best suited for basic cable. And away from my memories it goes. Now let's wrap things up with these last couple of movies, like San Andreas, one of the cheesiest disaster epics we've gotten lately, but still enjoyable if you like watching The Rock in large-scale special effects, the sci-fi thriller Selfless, another strong indicator that Ryan Reynolds should seriously fire his agent, Shaun the Sheep movie, which was every bit as smart, charming, and laugh-out-loud funny as any of Aardman Studios' previous claymation features, Sinister 2, a terribly misguided sequel to one of the few good horror movies we've gotten in the past few years, the boxing drama Southpaw, which benefited more from Jake Gyllenhaal's intimidating performance than it did from its cornball screenplay, Seth MacFarlane's Ted 2, a lesser movie than its predecessor, but at least was more watchable than A Million Ways to Die in the West, Disney's Tomorrowland, my current pick for the year's most disappointing movie, at least until something even more soul-crushing comes along, Vacation, the National Lampoon revamp that'll have you wondering what Marvel Studios saw in this painfully unfunny picture that made them want to hire the people behind it to write the script for their upcoming Spider-Man reboot. Seriously, what? Then we have Welcome to Me, the Kristen Wiig comedy about mental illness that you're not quite sure whether to find cheerfully amusing or just flat out disturbing. And finally, Z for Zachariah, a fascinating survivalist drama that proves once and for all that living alone in the post-apocalypse isn't all that bad, just as long as you get to sleep with a hot chick from Wolf of Wall Street. And now it's time to unveil my picks for the best and worst movies of the summer. Starting at the very bottom of the barrel with my number 5 worst pick, Aloha, a seriously unfocused and poorly assembled romantic comedy that sadly hindered the talents of its enormous cast, as well as the patience of its target audience. At number 4 we have Terminator Genisys, the movie that made everyone realize what an absolute masterpiece the last movie in the franchise was in comparison to this piece of shit. Number 3 is the lazily cheap and unfrightening found footage film The Gallows, which ranks alongside the other half-assed productions that Blumhouse gleefully shat out this year. Number 2 is arguably the most hated movie of the year so far, Fantastic Four, which did even more damage to an already disgraced comic book series than any of us could have possibly imagined, and yet that still didn't turn out to be the lowest circle of hell that I had to endure this summer, which if you haven't guessed yet, turned out to be Pixels, the latest cinematic skid mark from Happy Madison Productions that's also one of the laziest, cringe-inducing, and just downright offensive cash grabs that practically eviscerates everything we love about the 1980s and retro video gaming. So don't act too surprised if this movie doesn't change its top spot by the end of the year. And now let's move on to the opposite side of the spectrum and see what made my best of list, starting with my number 5 pick, Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, which proves once again that this series is nowhere near out of gas and that Tom Cruise will do virtually anything for a Klondike bar. At number 4 we have The Gift, one of the most twisted and suspenseful psychological thrillers to come out since Gone Girl, and tied for the number 3 spot are 2 of the best animated films of the year from 2 of my favorite animation studios, Pixar's Inside Out and Studio Ghibli's When Marnie Was There. Coming straight out of number 2 is the controversial NWA biopic, which featured uncanny performances and phenomenal filmmaking that'll delight both moviegoers and hip-hop enthusiasts alike. And finally, arriving on top as the best damn entertaining movie of the summer, Mad Max Fury Road. One of the biggest, most adrenaline-fueled, batshit crazy, action-packed motion pictures ever to be projected onto the silver screen. In fact, this movie was so good that it even caused many moviegoers to doubt whether or not the upcoming Star Wars movie could possibly live up to this film's equivalent of a chaotic orchestra made up entirely of mad genius and badassery.
That's impossible! Nothing is impossible!
Should have done that a lot earlier. And there you have it, my summer movie recap of 2015. Now it's your turn. What were your favorite and least favorite movies of the summer? Leave a comment below, feel free to subscribe, and like always, I'm the host, and thanks for watching.
We need some action if we're gonna make it like a true survivor. We need some action.